What do 13-year-olds feel about school? New data from RNZ's largest ongoing cohort study, the Growing Up in New Zealand Longitudinal Study, shows social connections and caring teachers are top of the list for 13-year-olds when talking about school life. They particularly want time and space to develop meaningful social connections with their peers. Bullying remains a major concern, but kids were well aware of the bullying risks on platforms like social media. The research was done with an app co-designed with 13-year-olds that the children could use to write, record audio or video responses on how their school life was going. The research was done through the Our Voices program, which is an offshoot attached to the wider longitudinal study. Dr. Emma Marks is an Auckland University Research Fellow in Social and Community Health. Kia ora, Emma.
Kia ora, good morning.
What an interesting approach you've taken here. Just remind us, first of all, of the substantive study, the longitudinal study.
Yes, so Growing Up in New Zealand began in 2009-2010 when 6,853 young people were enrolled in the study along with their mothers and their partners, and they've been followed across time at various points with growth, development, health and wellbeing surveys. And the Our Voices project comes in as the young people were turning about 13. So it's a sort of an offshoot of the Growing Up, but using the same cohort as the Growing Up in New Zealand cohort.
I'm really interested as to how you've gone about it. Qualitative research as well as quantitative, or mainly qualitative. How have you gone about the design of the study?
Yeah, so this one is really interesting because obviously Growing Up in New Zealand largely collects quantitative data. So it's sort of survey design data, a little bit like sort of census information, obviously in a great deal more information than that. And so the Our Voices project is different because it was always designed to collect kind of the actual voices of the young people in the study in their own words. And so when it was designed, obviously you've said it was, co-designed with young people as a way of hoping to increase the engagement and make it relevant to young people. And so that, they could then use this app called the Our Journey app, which was also had a quite heavy te ao Māori lens put over it. It was a journey on a waka going through various places. And as they did that, they were sort of then asked various questions about their life, their home, school, their friends. And as you said, they could give us text responses, video responses, or they could record their voices, and then all of that data was then collected and then has been analysed by various researchers and postgrad and undergrad students in order to kind of come up with the reports that I've sort of got in front of me today.
Great. Well, can you draw out from that, please, some of the key insights?
So we've had a series of reports produced. I think the ones I've got today in front of me one is about kind of social connections and friends and what makes a good friend. And the other one, the report, is more about the school experience and overcoming challenges at school. So that was more about who has it easy and who has it tough at school. And then a little bit more about what can be done to help, what the young people thought could be done to help. And I think what's interesting here is that often when this kind of research is done, specifically looking at those who have issues, the research is focused on a particular group of young people, whereas Our Voices deliberately went and asked a wide range of young people their thoughts on who had it easy and who had it, not so easy at school, and what they thought could be done to improve the school environment and their lives generally.
Social connection, incredibly important for them. In some ways that's self-evident, but actually their awareness of it and prioritising of it is interesting, isn't it?
It is really interesting that they gave very honest and insightful perspectives on what they valued in a friend, we asked them to define a good friend, someone who they said often was on the same wavelength, had shared similar values and perspectives as they did, someone who was a source of support, and that they could, share responsibilities with. The thing that I thought was really lovely that came across quite clearly with that was that they often had a very strong sense of gratitude and attachment to their friends, and they viewed them as something to be cherished, a friendship to be cherished. And then having friends, then when we talked more about the school environment, was something that sort of provided a ballast or a support system for those in school who were having, a tough time.
Did many or most succeed in establishing friendships, or at least a key relationship? Did any speak of being lonely and not being able to do that?
So one of the questions we asked was about belonging, and where do you belong, and who are your people, essentially. And friends and whānau and family came up as top kind of those two kind of things that were asked of. But we had about 7.5% of the young people who answered who felt that they didn't either know where they belonged or didn't feel like they had kind of a close circle of friends or any friends, or they didn't know what made a good friend, like they didn't really have that support system. So there were certainly some who were not, who didn't have the support structure around them that they would like.
What do you think schools can learn from that in terms of how they try and facilitate those social connections? And obviously some are very good at it, but people fall through the cracks. But do you think there's something from the children's own perspective, the students' own perspective, that schools can learn from?
I think so, definitely. I think a couple of things. So that the young people gave us quite a long list of kind of things that were ways they thought that the student experience could be improved at schools. And some of it was sort of on the academic kind of line, and some of it was more about like improving classroom climate or the school environment. And so those things ranged from kind of like having smaller class sizes, more teacher aides in class, counsellors, having social skills classes, and getting rid of streaming came up a bit. A lot of young people didn't particularly like the ranking of students and streaming of students into classes. And then other things in kind of on the more social spectrum with things like helping them build relationships or finding them safe spaces to go, or completing, like having wellbeing surveys, more one-on-one time with their teacher, check-in points, so they felt their teacher knew more about them than just their kind of academic achievements. Social skills classes and things like mental health checkups. So they had a wide range of kind of ideas and perspectives and how to make the school climate better. And then they also, I think, quite importantly kind of noted that they don't really have the power in this relationship, and that most of them said things like the way to initiate change kind of had to come through both the kind of the school leadership and staff, and that some of those things were kind of outside their control, but they certainly had a voice and they would like it to be kind of heard.
That's really interesting, actually, because they're third formers, and I know what I used to get called when I was a third former, right? You're right, and we all know what we were called.
Yeah.
You're right back at the bottom of the pile. And
Yep.
and is that something else schools can take on? I mean, yes, they are the newbies, but actually they have valuable stuff to offer in terms of how things are going to go for them.
I certainly think so. And you're right, that's a very big transition time in their lives. Often they've just come from primary or junior school into high school, and they've often lost their friendship circles that they've had for quite a long time. And I think that the schools then providing ways of the young people to kind of find their people within this new and often larger school setting means that they certainly have ideas about how that could be done, and would really appreciate that the school for them is the other thing to note, is a really massive part of their
life.
lives. Their friends, their school, where they go every day. Unlike when they were younger, when their family was a sort of a more central to their well-being, actually it's the place they go, for 9 hours a day is becoming the most critical part of their lives.
What did they say about bullying, its prevalence and how they handled it?
So yeah, bullying comes up a lot, and it's a fairly well researched in terms of how bad New Zealand does generally in the bullying statistics, and all of the young people recognised that basically bullying was one of the kind of the major keys for those who were not doing so well at school, and it largely came down to those getting bullied who didn't fit in, who were different in some way, stuck out in some way. We asked them, who has a good time at school and who has a tough time at school. And those who had a tough time at school often sat in the kind of either neurodiverse or rainbow community, or anyone different, anyone shy, quiet, anyone without friends, anyone different essentially. And then we asked, well, who has it good, who's doing well. And it was essentially kind of the opposite. It was those, who were popular, who had friends, who were, doing well in school. Sometimes it came down to economic things, not being poor, So it was a wide range of areas where those who were doing well and those who weren't doing so well. And obviously bullying then came up the minute you can be singled out in any way. Bullying was one of the things that they were all incredibly aware of. And both in an in-person bullying but also from online and cyberbullying kind of perspective.
All right. What about the online scene and the tech that they had? I'm interested as to how many of them, if you got as specific about this, had smartphones, for example. But just tell me about their experience of the online world and particularly as how it related to the school environment.
So, yeah, we asked them questions about from a social perspective about their online presence and how social media helped them facilitate kind of social connection and what they used the online world for. And so largely it was for obviously talking to friends and family and people around the world and keeping up with trends and all that sort of stuff. And some of them mentioned various platforms that they use, like Discord or various other things. And then obviously they said, alongside the positive aspects where you can kind of find people who are like-minded. I watched a whole group of makeup artists talk about their favourite, people online who, do things on a TV program once. And I had heard of none of these incredibly famous online personas who were in this world. But you can imagine for young people, if they can find their, someone or a group of people like them, then it can be incredibly beneficial. But on the flip side of that, obviously, is that they all recognise that with an online presence essentially being omnipresent in their lives, even if they weren't on social media themselves, the kind of the online world and the kind of potential for bullying came through regardless of that. And they were all incredibly aware of it. And also that there was not particularly much that could be done about it. It was sort of like a toss of a coin. You took the good with the bad, and everyone was aware of the bad with online bullying, and that also they were also very aware that people were often kind of behind the screen said things and did things that they probably wouldn't do to a person's face, and that kind of anonymity had made the kind of the social aspects kind of worse for some people.
So they're actually quite aware, yeah.
They're very aware.
Yeah.
They're very aware and they're very intelligent about these things.
Now, what did they say about teachers and what they wanted from teachers? It's interesting because you're at that age also, aren't you, where it's quite cool sometimes to be taking the mickey out of the teachers or whatever, but did they speak pretty positively about some, and did they say what they were looking for?
So we have a separate report that I think is either just been released or just about to be released,
right,
that literally directly answers your question about what they wanted in a teacher and what they thought a good teacher was. From the two reports that I have, when teachers came up, the young people said quite clearly that they wanted their teachers to think of them as more than just an academic output
project.
They wanted them to know them. They wanted to see them as a whole person, have like more one-on-one conversations with them, the ability for them to check in with them. They want suggestions for form room in the morning check-ins so that the teachers knew the young people in their lives and what they were experiencing in a way that kind of felt more connected. So that's one of the things they said that they wanted their teachers to kind of do. They also, if you go back to bullying, teachers were mentioned in the kind of, we want them to be more proactive in what they could do with bullying. They felt that often that teachers often maybe saw or knew that bullying was happening, but not much got done, and they wanted the teachers to be able to listen and be able to be a voice, but also for them to take a more active role when they thought that bullying was happening.
Did you have some specific suggestions? You've touched on some as we've gone along, but were there any other specific suggestions that came out of this?
So in terms of the kind of the bullying thing, the young people talked about wanting to have more kind of anti-bullying programs embedded within the school. They also, as I've just sort of mentioned, they wanted the teachers to be a bit more kind of proactive. And then the other thing that came up several times was more about that they wanted the kind of the process by which the bullies were dealt with to be more transparent. They often felt like the kind of the outcomes or the implications for that weren't seen, or nothing happened. It felt kind of behind closed doors, and it was sort of like no resolution. That the bullies were not necessarily getting having the consequences for their actions taken seriously by the school. And so they wanted the young people kind of wanted a much kind of more a clearer and more transparent process that they could see.
And in terms of other recommendations, have we pretty much covered them off, do you think?
I think so. I think that I think young people have like lots of ideas about how they want their school to be and to function as a kind of a socially cohesive place to be, and that we know that school engagement is one of the things that is the key driver for achievement in schools, and that if you don't have engagement, then young people don't do well, they drop out, and we end up with the statistics we see in schools. But actually, that schools need to be a total environment where their social lives and their well-being is considered alongside their academic achievements.
I'm interested also the way you went about this in co-designing the app. Is that adaptable? Was that a tool that schools, if you're prepared to make it available, could use themselves in some ways? I know they're very adept at various forms of communication these days, both with parents and kids, but it would seem to be a useful means of checking in from time to time, right?
Yeah, so I guess the original aim, obviously this was MB funded, this particular part of the study, so it was separately funded. And it was sort of an innovation to look at a way that you could engage young people in their kind of mental health and wellbeing journeys. And so the potential for this particular app or one similar to it to be developed has been recognised by the Ministry of Education and various other agencies as a way of kind of potentially being used as a tool. I mean, maybe not this particular app, but certainly kind of the bones of that or the ideas of it is a way of getting young people to engage
in a way
with their
that works for
well-being
them.
in a way that works for them. Exactly.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. Emma Marks, who's an Auckland University Research Fellow who has worked on that report, insights into 13-year-olds and their experiences and feelings about school from the Growing Up in New Zealand longitudinal study.